The man who spent 12 years in Azkaban for betraying the Potters was guilty, not framed, not mistaken for someone else, not a victim of a system that moves too fast in wartime, guilty in the precise, irreducible sense of the word. He knew the address, he spoke it aloud, and he stood on the street outside Godric's Hollow and listened to what happened next. Everything the wizarding world believed about Sirius Black was built on a lie. Not Dumbledore's lie, not the Ministry's lie, his own, spoken first to everyone around him, then to the Dementors feeding on his guilt night after night, and finally to the only audience that ever truly mattered, himself. The third book rests entirely on one assumption. That assumption is wrong. Remove it, and what appears underneath isn't a simpler story. It's a story about something the wizarding world never found a spell for. What happens when love and betrayal live inside the same person at the same time, feeding each other, impossible to separate, until the person carrying both of them can no longer tell where one ends and the other begins. The explanation doesn't lie in politics. It doesn't lie in fear or ambition or the seduction of dark power. It lies somewhere quieter and more devastating than any of those things. It lies in the psychology of a man who spent his entire life being second. Not second in importance, second in his own perception. A man whose sense of self was never really his own. Sirius Black fled the House of Black at 16 and moved directly into the Potter household. That act is universally framed as heroism. In one sense it was, but it also established the structural template for everything that followed. His identity built entirely through proximity to James. Not alongside James, through him. His worth, his belonging, his sense of existing as something more than a disowned heir to a name he despised, all of it routed through a single relationship with a single person who was, by every measure, more anchored and more whole than Sirius had ever managed to be alone. This is not a flaw that announces itself. It operates quietly, beneath a friendship that looked from the outside like pure, unbreakable devotion. Then James married Lily. Then Harry was born. Then the war began fracturing everything the Order had tried to build.
War isolates. Dumbledore himself would admit this later, that the paranoia of that period destroyed alliances that should have survived it. The Order demanded secrecy at a level that corroded trust from the inside. Members suspected each other across dinner tables. People who had stood together for years found they could no longer be certain of anything. In this environment, Sirius watched James become someone unrecognizable in small, irreversible increments. A father, a husband, a man whose center of gravity had permanently shifted away from the axis the two of them had shared since adolescence. And he watched Peter, small, frightened, perpetually uncertain Peter, who had always occupied the lowest rung of their group's unspoken hierarchy, suddenly handed the role of secret keeper. The role Sirius had declined himself. For tactical reasons, he told everyone. The logic was sound. The obvious choice makes the obvious target. Better to misdirect. Better to let Voldemort waste resources hunting the wrong man. The tactical reasoning was real. It was also not the only reason. Voldemort read people with a precision no legilimens could match. He didn't offer Sirius power. That would have been an insult, too close to everything Sirius had already fled. He offered something far more seductive and far more personal: significance. The quiet suggestion that Sirius Black was the one who truly understood what the war required. That James, for all his warmth and loyalty, was operating inside a comfortable story about friendship that had never been tested at its foundations. That Sirius alone stood at the actual center of things, not as backdrop, not as supporting figure, but as the person on whom everything genuinely depended. It was, in the deepest sense, what he had always needed someone to say. The recruitment happens across weeks, through concessions so small each one feels justifiable. An order patrol route, the location of a meeting, details that individually harm no one, but that accumulate over time into something that can reach anything. Each step is accompanied by the same internal logic. This one doesn't count. This one doesn't cross the line. That logic is the mechanism of betrayal in its most recognizable form. Not a single catastrophic choice, but a slow erosion of the boundary between what a person will and won't do, until the boundary has dissolved entirely and they are standing somewhere they swore they would never stand. On the night of October 31st, 1981, Voldemort knows the address in Godric's Hollow not because he broke through a Fidelius charm. Peter Pettigrew in this reality is not the traitor. He is simply a coward who felt the shape of the truth and chose silence over courage. Sirius gave the address directly, quickly, almost casually, the way a person speaks something they have been rehearsing internally for weeks without admitting what the rehearsal is for. Voldemort kills James in the hallway, kills Lily at the nursery door. Harry survives. The Dark Lord is scattered across the night. The cottage stands half-destroyed under autumn stars. Everything happens exactly as in canon, with one exception. The guilty man is standing outside on the street, and he hears the explosion. Sirius had constructed this in abstractions, information past, consequences theoretical, outcomes remote. The sound of the explosion is not abstract. The way the upper floor collapses is not abstract. Hagrid arriving first, standing in the rubble with an enormous infant pressed against his enormous chest and tears running openly down his face, none of that is abstract. Sirius sees Harry, alive, marked, surrounded by the ruins of the house where his parents died 4 minutes ago. In canon, Sirius hands Hagrid the motorcycle and races after Pettigrew, driven by grief and the clean fury of an innocent man whose rage has somewhere righteous to go. In this reality, he runs too, but not toward anything, away from his own hands, away from his own voice which spoke a specific address with a specific number of syllables 7 hours ago. Away from the look on a baby's face that he will not be able to explain using any of the language he has relied on until tonight. Peter Pettigrew watches from a distance and understands everything. He has no proof, only the word of a frightened, unremarkable wizard against the word of Sirius Black. He disappears, fakes his own death, kills 12 muggles not by design, but in the blind panic of a man running from an accusation he cannot disprove, making decisions that don't survive examination. The Aurors find Sirius Black within hours, standing near the ruins. He doesn't run, he doesn't raise his wand, he doesn't say a single word in his own defense. That detail gets recorded as evidence of guilt. It is actually something else. The behavior of a man who has run out of internal vocabulary required to construct one. Azkaban, no trial, 12 years.
In canon, Sirius survives Azkaban through innocence. I am not guilty. 3 words that functioned as a Patronus the Dementors couldn't touch, an anchor beneath every layer of darkness they fed him. The knowledge of his own righteousness proved stronger than 12 years of systematic psychological destruction. In this reality, those 3 words don't exist. Dementors feed on happiness, that is the version taught at Hogwarts.
The more precise description is that they amplify whatever psychological material is already present. Fear becomes paralysis, regret becomes annihilation, and guilt with specific faces attached to it, with a specific sound of structural collapse, with the specific image of a living child above the ruins of what that guilt produced, becomes something that operates below the threshold of language, something that doesn't respond to reasoning or resistance or the passage of time. Sirius Black doesn't hold on. There is nothing to hold on to. By the end of his first year, he no longer consistently responds to his own name. By the end of the third, the prison records note simply, unresponsive, deterioration ongoing. The animal form that saved the canonical Sirius, the dog's mind too simple for Dementors to fully penetrate, provides no refuge in this timeline. Even a dog cannot escape guilt that has 3 specific faces. The faces don't disappear just because the mind holding them has simplified. Meanwhile, Peter Pettigrew hides with the Weasley family as a rat. Not by plan, he stumbled into safety and stayed because there was nowhere else to go. He watches Harry Potter arrive in Ron's life, sits on the shoulder of the boy whose parents he failed to protect, whose godfather he failed to expose. He waits, not out of loyalty to any master, but because waiting is the only action available to a man who has made every other choice by default. When Voldemort begins his return in Harry's 4th year, the faithful servant is already positioned inside the closest circle. The ritual at the graveyard proceeds with a precision the canonical version lacked, because Peter Pettigrew in this timeline feels nothing complicated, no residual attachment to the Potters, no ghost of old loyalty interfering with his hands, just the task and the fear of failing it. Voldemort returns, complete. The war unfolds. Harry walks into the Forbidden Forest, dies, returns, wins. The prophecy fulfills itself in every particular exactly as in canon. And it is precisely here, in the moment of victory, in the aftermath of everything, that the hidden architecture of this entire timeline reveals itself. Sirius Black died in Azkaban in 1996, quietly. Cell number 7, no witnesses. The Ministry recorded it as natural causes, the administrative language for what Dementors do to people, kept near them for 15 years without an anchor. No obituary, no name on any memorial. The files sealed as standard procedure for deceased prisoners. Harry Potter never learns of this death. To Harry, Sirius Black is simply the name attached to his orphanhood. A word in textbooks, a man he hates with cold, abstract certainty, the kind of hatred directed not at a person, but at a category, because the person was never real to the one doing the hating. In canon, the death of Sirius in the Department of Mysteries is among the most shattering moments in the entire series, because it destroys the possibility of a family Harry had only just allowed himself to want. It hardens him. It strips away the last buffer between the boy and the full weight of what the war requires. In this timeline, that hardening happens earlier, goes deeper, and leaves no scar, because there was never anything to lose. Harry Potter defeats Voldemort as an orphan in the most complete sense of the word. No living person who loved his parents, no bridge to who James and Lily actually were as human beings rather than legends. Only the story which cannot love anyone back. The final image of this timeline belongs to a cell in Azkaban that has already been cleared and reassigned. On the lower section of the wall, barely visible beneath years of damp, someone scratched the same 2 words into the stone over and over, growing smaller and more compressed toward the floor, as though whoever wrote them kept running out of space and refused to stop. I'm sorry. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." No one reads them. The cell is repainted in the spring of 1997, standard maintenance. The wall goes white. The words disappear. And Harry Potter, who will spend the rest of his life believing the man in that cell felt nothing, never learns that the last coherent act of Sirius Black's disintegrating mind was not self-pity, was not revision of history, was not the justification that guilty people usually reach for when everything else has been taken away. It was an apology addressed to no one, which is the only kind available to people who destroyed the ones they would have sent it to. The darkest thing in us is not what we are capable of in hatred, but what we turn out to be capable of while still loving.